Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Simple Worship Conversation. Sarah, you may or may not know this, but this is affectionately known as the morning program with Shannon Moore. I always wanted a TV show, and this is as close as I have ever gotten. So
I love it. So honored to be here.
I'm glad that you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself. This is your first time on the Simple Worship Conversation.
Yeah, I'm Reverend Sarah Almanza. I go by she, her pronouns. Really right now, I do what I call freelance ministry. So I am in search and call looking for my next full-time gig, but until that happens, like I have found just a lot of joy in serving churches during their in-between times, whether that's pulpit supply. I just wrapped up an interim senior minister position while their senior minister was deployed for a year, and so I got to help out with that. And so it's a true delight to be able to serve congregations while they're in transition, in need, and I love it.
Well, that sounds really interesting, and
It's fun because it's something different all the time, and I love it.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that you're here today. Simple Worship is our short, casual service. It's only a 20-minute service, and so in keeping with that, this conversation, we just have a 10-minute conversation about the scripture that we talked about in the worship service that week. So today we are looking at Mark chapter 8, verses 31 through 38. And just to put it into a little context, after Jesus has been healing and performing miracles, just before this text, he has asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" They said John the Baptist, Elijah. He said, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter said, "The Messiah." And Jesus sort of confirmed that, but said, "Don't tell anybody that." So that's where we are. So Mark chapter 8, starting at verse 31. I'll read the scripture, then I'll start the timer and we'll talk about it. Here is the reading. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." That's the end of the reading. So I will start our timer. All right, the first question I like to ask, what do you think? What comes up for you with this reading?
Yeah, great question. This, I feel like I say this all the time when I engage different scriptures. This is just one of those scriptures I really struggle with. And I love Mark. Mark's my favorite gospel, and so I appreciate being there. But this is one of those that I couldn't always put my finger on why I struggled so much about it for a long time. And I think what it comes down to is the suffering that goes along with it. And I think a lot of people have used the scripture of like, take up your cross and bear it as a way to justify suffering, or to almost like feel like they have to do this alone. And I just always struggled with that. Recently, I came across a podcast with Erna Hackett, who is talking about individualism versus and how it's become a big part of Christianity in America. Mm-hmm. And when I did read over this text and like didn't do any studying for it, just sat with it and thought about like, what were my feelings? I was like, that's what my issue with this text is that I have always read it in such an individualized way. Like, this is just me and my cross to bear. But like, whoa, what does it mean to think of this as like a community, us together? Like, Jesus doesn't say necessarily in the text, like, you have to do this. He gathers the followers, he gathers the disciples together. And they're just like that moment of like, oh, maybe that's what I was missing. Maybe that's what I was wrestling with this text for so long, is that like you have to bear this struggle alone versus like, we are in this together to share the good news.
Gotcha. Does what stands out for me, and one of the things that I sort of have trouble with or wrapping my head around, is the sharp exchange between Jesus and Peter. There's this rebuking, and that word doesn't really even give us the sharpness that comes across in the original, in the Greek. But one thing I read last week said it's almost as if Jesus said to Peter, "Shut up." It's that harsh, that Peter would speak harshly to Jesus. That's where I want to start. Why do you think it was so important for Peter to have Jesus stop talking about the suffering and the rejection that was to come for him? It seemed to be a big deal to him.
Absolutely. And I think that comes from like someone you care about. You don't want to see them suffer. And I don't necessarily like, I don't want anybody I know or care about, even people I don't know, to suffer. And so I would always challenge that, even if this is Jesus talking about what is to come and what the reality is. As someone who is close to him, as someone who loves him, that's not what I want to see. That's not what I feel like. Does it have to be? And I think I would always, again, I'd push against that. Does suffering have to happen? Does it, and so I think Jesus is just like, hold on. I want to be real with you, because I don't think, I think Jesus wants them to hear that this is going to be hard. And anytime you're challenging authority, it's going to be hard, and there's going to be challenges, and there's going to be suffering. But what that looks like, I get it. I get that challenge of like, but I don't want you to suffer.
You're a little more generous with Peter. Because I wondered if Peter was enjoying the spotlight a little bit, that Jesus had just confirmed that he was the Messiah, and that as these crowds of people are gathering around Jesus now, that the disciples get to share in a little bit of that spotlight, and to hear about rejection and death is one thing. But then Jesus also said, and not only will he die, but will rise again. And I wonder if Peter thought, you sound nuts. Like you're going to lose them if you keep talking like this. So I'm a little less generous with with Peter than you are, but I like where you're coming from with that as well, that it's we don't like to see people that we love suffer. If we get back into the meat of this, after Jesus talks about picking up the cross, then he philosophizes a little bit about what does it profit to gain the world and forfeit your life. What do you make of that? Is that something that we can use in our own fate, or was he more specifically talking to them? What's the value in this red letter?
Oh boy, Shannon, that's a good question. And I think it's just about like not wasting what you have, whatever that may mean. Let's see, which verse was that again? That is
down around verse
36. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Yeah, I think it's recognizing the work that needs to be done. I think that it is recognizing that the gospel needs to be shared over and over and over again. And that's kind of where I lean into. Again, I pull away from that, the suffering, death. I think there can be, we can find beautiful, holy things in death, but I lean against, I push the other way a little bit and say, like, how do we use this? Don't let it go aside. You have this information, you have this knowledge, you know what you're going to need to do. So do it.
Yeah. And I think for us in our context, it's such a different thing to talk about suffering or um, proclaiming the gospel. In the United States, there's no risk in saying I'm a Christian. I mean, that's, you're not going to be persecuted for saying I'm a Christian, but we might be persecuted if we actually do the things that Jesus said.
Right.
Because we rely on the self, what makes us feel good, the institutions and the structures that we've created around our faith that insulate us from actually doing the stuff that the risk taking that Jesus talks about. Um, I was having a conversation earlier today with somebody, and we were talking about how it's easy to say, I'm not a racist. But it's hard to say to your best friend or your mother, what you just said is racist, and to rebuke that. That's the hard work of the of what you have said. And same thing, to say I'm a Christian is one thing, to walk in the steps that Jesus laid for us is another.
Yeah, absolutely. And pushing against the institution is something that Jesus did. And I think we are encouraged to do. And that's always hard work. And I think that's challenging work, especially when there is comfort and security that comes with the institution.
So in your interim work or your freelance work, have you found it easier to push a little bit, knowing that you're the short timer?
Yeah, it's so much easier. Like, it's so much easier. And that's one of the conversations I always have with a pastor when whether it's just a one-time pulpit supply or something more long-term, is like, what can I do? What message do the people need to hear while you're gone? Because and I've served in, long-term in congregations, and I understand the fear that comes with pushing too hard. Or saying the wrong thing. Like, that's your job, that's your livelihood. And there is something about that is important and real, that I recognize and honor. But I'm coming in and I'm like, what can I do to help the conversation to maybe lift up things in a way where they're not going to push back against you, but they can process with me, like, because we have different perspectives. And so I think that's one of the joys I get about being able to come in and say some maybe more challenging things that need to be heard. Because the privilege I bring to the table is that this one job, I need this to pay my bills, but like, this one place is not where all of my security lies. I have, I'm a bivocational minister. I have other sources of income. There's other ways there that help me navigate the waters and give me the security I need to say some of the more challenging things that need to be said.
Awesome. That's a great, and there's our timer. It always comes across really loud on the Zoom.
That was super fast. I can't believe it's been 10 minutes.
I know, it goes fast. Thank you so much. Really, really good discussion today. I appreciate your taking the time to be with us. And I hope everybody has a great week, and we will see you next time. Take care.